so perhaps It Kills Guilliman has become a bit of a meme these days, but even for him, being laid low by a dwarf engineer in a single phase is a bit embarrassing, never mind the fact that he can potentially do it twice per turn. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about a surprisingly ferocious dwarf engineer, and looking at what this Brokhyr Iron Master can do, both in terms of fixing up Votann war machines, but also it seems that he can turn on a ridiculous amount of mortal wounds if you do give him a bit of investment and command points. His stat line I think is at least not particularly over-assuming. You get him in a little unit with 3 cog robot assistants and an ironkin. It's kind of the Votann equivalent of a tech marine, giving a nearby vehicle +1 to hit that he can also do for core units, and also repairing D3+1 wounds on a damaged vehicle. The +1 comes from the cog robots if there's any still left. Stat line wise, he's a relatively standard infantry character, strength and toughness 4 as is Votann. He hits on 2s with the grav rifle but only 3s in melee, and only have a 4+ save. His grav rifle isn't particularly scary in its unbuffed form as well. 3 shots at 18 inches, strength 5, AP 3, damage 2, going to damage 3 against heavies. It still will give you some pretty solid damage against terminators and things though. In combat he also has a graviton hammer, strength 8, AP -2 and damage 2, again going to damage 3 versus 3+ saves or better in the standard grav rules. Otherwise, besides that, the E-cogs are slightly weedy infantry units, a couple of kind of underwhelming attacks, and 1 melee plasma torch which hits at damage 2, AP -4. I'd probably keep that one alive till last. And then there's the Ironkin Assistant, which gets a slightly stingy pistol weapon, strength 6 and AP -3, and it does have beam, so you might have a very small chance to skewer multiple units. Overall, as a buffing character, he's pretty efficient. He'll help out nearby vehicles, and the grav gun might plink away at a heavy infantry or 2 if he's lucky. I did mention the crazy damage combo briefly in another video, but basically the idea is that you upgrade this guy to the Forge Master, the upgrade that costs 25 points for him, as well as giving you other buffing options. It also gives him the chance to deal a whole load of mortal wounds. Basically it means that any wound rolls of an unmodified 6 count as dealing mortal wounds instead of the normal damage, provided he is targeting something with a judgment token on it, and of course judgment tokens can give you the chance of getting more unmodified wound rolls of a 6. It means that even at base, his grav rifle, when it targets something with a 3+ save or better, it'll basically convert every 6 to hit and to wound against a judgment token unit into 3 mortal wounds, which is really quite dangerous. With only 3 shots though, that wouldn't be all that big unless you can get more judgment tokens on them. Then the game becomes to make those 6s to hit and wound happen more often, and when they do happen, to make them happen extra hard. First up, Votann characters have a 1 CP stratagem to count 1 given target as 3 judgment tokens, and that lasts till the end of the game. That now means that every 4+ to hits will deal 3 mortal wounds, which is quite a lot better. Then you can get yourself a full reroll through a couple of different sources, either from a high Carl giving you the full rerolls buff, or a 1 CP judgment token stratagem, though admittedly he would be competing with a lot of the army that would also like that. That now means that every 4+ to hit causes 3 mortal wounds, and you get to reroll failed hits as well, getting you quite a lot of them. Then if we took him in the Ymir conglomerate, which has a warlord trait for +1 damage to his weapons, that now means that instead of 3 mortal wounds you're getting 4 mortal wounds on your target, so a pretty spectacular amount of mortal wounds from hits alone, as you'd want to reroll all the hits and fish for any 4+s. Overall, if you do that, even discounting any extra bonuses from the weapon itself, you average around about 9 mortal wounds turn on turn with average rolls, though obviously divided in chunks of 4. Perhaps the craziest thing is that if you have the CP to spare for rerolls in melee as well, you could potentially do this both at range and then in melee. So just a brutal amount of mortal wounds coming out of one engineer if he gets all the best buffs lined up. It is admittedly a bit less good against anything without a 3+ save or better. Against 4+ saves or worse he averages 7 mortal wounds, but it's still not exactly bad. So delivering to full meme potential, it does mean that if Guilliman is striding through the ranks, breaking his vehicles nearby, it might not necessarily be the big vehicles with the big guns or the scary land fortresses railgun that Guilliman really needs to fear, but one angry dwarf with some grav weapons. Admittedly, I do think that Guilliman's profile is kind of showing its age. Really great armor and invul saves, but no mortal wound defense. I feel like if and when Games Workshop chooses to rewrite his profile for 9th edition, he might get something similar to Abaddon's take a maximum of 3 wounds per phase. For the moment though, he does remain very killable. Over in Theoryland, I guess it does mean that you could conceivably kill him twice in one turn. You average 18 mortal wounds on average. first with the Graviton rifle at range, and then with the Graviton hammer in combat, and it does seem pretty ridiculous if you're willing to throw quite a lot of CP to make it happen. We are picking on Guilliman here, though it's pretty crazy that this could be going off against other really meaty targets, things like entire squads of Terminators taken down, and potentially even Magnus laid low in a single round of shooting and combat. It is pretty mental coming out of a character that isn't even really supposed to be a massive damage dealer. Perhaps in reality, in more competitive games it might not be quite as bad as it sounds. The whole combo does cost 3 CP, plus a specific Warlord trait locked to one league, plus the model himself is pretty slow at 5-inch movement and fairly short ranged as well. Still though, at least on paper, it does seem like a very scary hidden counterpunch that you could have lurking in your lines. He sits around buffing vehicles, and then can move forward to smash a given unit to bits, if he can muster the CP to turn him into a mortal wound slaughter machine. Talking of his other benefits though, I feel like most people will probably upgrade him to the Forge Master, potentially for this combo, but also for the other benefits. It gets him access to a great Warlord trait, plus he has the discount to War Gear stratagems nearby, which is always quite handy to save CP on in 9th edition. Potentially that could be quite nice with teleporting Iron here, starting next to him, and then jumping to a different section of the board. The Transhuman Shield Crest one also seems like an okay target. For Warlord traits, I feel like the Forge Master one, Master Armourer, is the best. That's the one that gives you +1 to repair the vehicle nearby, plus you get to negate a single failed save for vehicles within 6 inches. That again is pretty nutty, and we'll get onto that in just a second. Perhaps the other competing one is a long list. It allows you to redistribute judgment tokens for slain units. You can ignore cover, but perhaps most interestingly, ignore lookout, sir. So if your opponent did have a character that you wanted to snipe dead with this damage combo, he might be able to unload it at range and just blast out one character out for a durable battle line. Obviously both of these are competing with the Ymir one though, so you are choosing between him being a super buffing machine or super damage dealing machine. You can't have both on the same model. Relics wise, the best one looks like it's Volum's Master Artifice. This turns his grav gun into a beam weapon. Again, you wouldn't be able to use this with the Ymir Warlord trait combo, but it's still pretty interesting that you could be dealing mortal wounds to multiple targets along the beam's path. If the enemy obligingly lines up for you, you could be handing out quite a lot of mortal wounds besides just on your primary target. Otherwise for synergy, the High Carl can grant 4 rerolls for the mortal wound damage chance. Leagues wise, I think he works basically fine in any of them. Maybe for individual buffs to them, Ymir does seem perhaps the best. Besides the damage Warlord traits, plus 4-inch range and an invul don't hurt, though a couple of the others are interesting. Irani Surta Regulates makes him a bit tougher and could fight in death with that Graviton hammer, and Kronos gives him +1 attack and strength in melee, which again could feed into the mortal wound combo, but more so for the hammer than the gun. They also have an inbuilt Warlord trait for rerolling hits in combat, which again could make the mortal wound combo happen for cheaper. Finally, stratagems wise, there are the 2 that we've mentioned, max judgment on 1 unit, and then 4 rerolls against that unit, though I do admit that that 1 CP investment will be competing against other units who want the reroll hits very badly. I guess in theory the 2 CP to shoot in melee might occasionally be worth it as well, but I feel like it's usually going to be too much to justify. Finally, looking at a bit more of a buffing setup for him rather than just a damage dealer, I feel that perhaps you could park him behind or next to 2 land fortresses, screen from enemy shooting, and then just adding loads of efficiency both to damage and more so to defense. One fortress gets a +1 to hit, so it'll be hitting on 2s with the railguns and the bolt cannons. One of them gets to ignore a failed save each turn, which is really valuable. Say if you blocked a damage 3 shot, that will be 40 points or more worth of land fortress not killed. And then if you do have 1 damaged but not killed, you could also then repair an extra 4 wounds of it. Again, theoretically restoring something like 50 odd points worth of land fortress to the board. This guy does look like he could pay for his worth in land fortresses if they do take just 1 round of heavy enemy shooting. Then if the enemy does get too close, you could turn on the damage, use the damage combo, which will be a little bit more limited without Ymir, but you're still getting around 7 mortal wounds both at range and in melee if you have the CP to spare. In theory, that's a pretty reasonable chance of just blasting 5 Terminators into oblivion. Overall, I feel that the Brokhyr Iron Master is perhaps one of the single most valuable HQs in the Codex. If vehicles do get used regularly, I think that he will. Even on a slow mover, just the sheer amount of damage and durability seems like it's hard to pass up. He's not exactly going to carry an entire list by himself though. You can't have more than 1 Forge Master, though you could take an additional Iron Master if you wanted, but he does seem like a very strong option. So pretty mad stuff there. I do wonder whether Games Workshop might decide to mess around with judgment tokens, as I feel like a few of these slightly absurd things in the codex do stem from the converting auto hits to auto wounds of 6s. I guess we'll see just how strong Leaguers of Votann wind up stacking up overall. They've certainly got the damage, but range and movement might let them down. If they really do think that this is too OP and actually causing a problem in real games, I guess it's certainly not impossible that it might get nerfed. Let me know what you think anyway, look forward to reading the comments down below. I do wonder just how much you might actually be able to unload this crazy damage in practice. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, and feel free to check out my other video with a bunch of crazy Leagues of Votann combos, which I'll link down in the video description. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the content on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Making all the videos does take a fair amount of time and effort, and if you are enjoying quite a bit, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.